Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Glad you're here. Mr. Secretary, as the chairman of the Work and Welfare Subcommittee, we have responsibility, as you know, over TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which of course helps families move from government dependence to realizing their full potential through work. And we've been heavily focused in a bipartisan way on the subcommittee. Last year, HHS issued proposed rulemaking with substantial changes to the TANF program. In a letter to you sent in November by Chairman Smith and myself, we requested that HHS withdraw the proposed rule, which goes well beyond the statutory authority granted to the department, and we laid that out in the letter. Instead, our letter called on the administration to work with the committee to develop in a bipartisan way a proposal with legislative changes to strengthen accountability in the TANF program, which we think is essential. In your prior testimony before this committee, you indicated your intent, and we applaud you for that, for your willingness to work with Congress to make the needed changes to the TANF program. Further, in June of last year, in a response to the committee's letter expressing concerns about the welfare fraud scandal in Mississippi, former ACF Assistant Secretary Contreras indicated her willingness to work with us to improve TANF as well. And again, we commend her for that. Unfortunately, as we look at this year's budget, it did not include language regarding the reauthorization of TANF. And it appears the administration's intent is to sidestep Congress through this rulemaking process. And we share collectively with you the need that TANF needs to be focused on achieving its statutory purposes, and we've clearly demonstrated our intent to reform TANF through legislative action. The first of these reforms was included in the Fiscal Responsibility Act last year. Continuing our work on TANF, we have held 2 hearings, initiated a GAO investigation of non-assistance spending, and earlier this month, members of this committee introduced several bills to put in place guardrails to ensure TANF dollars are intentionally focused on removing barriers to work. I would also add, in fact, several of the reforms, Mr. Secretary, mirror the administration's own proposals and what you've talked about with TANF. And so, Mr. Secretary, I ask you again, will you work with the committee to develop a bipartisan proposal with our subcommittee with legislative changes to strengthen the accountability of TANF?
Congressman, we're absolutely ready to work with you. I think we've been in dialogue with not just your team, but many of the members on this committee's team when it comes to what we do on TANF. As you've mentioned, our goals are increased accountability. We want to make sure that there's a focus on family well-being and work. And we also want to make sure that states have the flexibility they need to make use of their dollars as best possible. But what we certainly want to make sure we do is avoid a court litigation on what we can and cannot do under TANF. That's where I think you all come in are very, very important, because to the degree that there are some questions about how far we can go with our regulations, you all have the statutory capability to make sure that we reform TANF in ways that bipartisanly get us moving, because I think all of us agree we don't want to see the kind of fraud or abuse of money for very needy families that we have seen.
And I guess, is there a reason why the budget didn't include the language regarding reauthorization of TANF?
Well, remember, we did have a proposal out on rulemaking. It's still out. We're still taking comments, and certainly this kind of discussion is good. My suspicion, and again, I can't tell you that I wrote every aspect of the budget, is that we think that there's a proposal that we put forward. We know that you all are working on legislation as well, and I hope what we can do is continue to work together.
Thank you for that. Also, our subcommittee recently held a hearing on modernizing child welfare, where we heard from witnesses with experience administrating Title IV-B child welfare program, which expired in 2021 and needs to be reauthorized. Witnesses shared with us how complex and duplicative child welfare funding streams are. The Biden administration has acknowledged the need to overhaul Title IV-B. However, the FY 2025 HHS budget proposes to increase funding without legislative changes. And I'm particularly interested in how we can make sure that Title IV-B is complementing the investment that we made in the Family First Prevention Services Act to prevent children from coming into foster care in the first place. Does HHS have a substantive legislative proposal for updating this program?
Congressman, I'm trying to think as to where we stand right now. We are trying to make sure that we implement with our proposed actions at the administrative level so that we focus on what the law requires us to make sure we're providing safe and proper care. As you know, we are trying to make sure that every child has access to a loving home, and so we're going to continue to push, at least at the regulatory level, to make sure that no child goes without access to a home that will be loving and safe and provide that child with the care that he or she needs.
And the last question, can we get a commitment with you on working on the reauthorization of Title IV-B?
Absolutely.
Thank you.